years have been a remarkable period of success, and that changes the terrain within which South-South and triangular cooperation is working. South-South is now much more visible, much more exposed to both building positive outcomes. We've seen the reputational rise of many southern partners in their partner countries, but also exposure, visibility and risk. This raises questions about the, if you like, the institutional lag. I think in many cases the energy and the financing and the practices of South-South have outstripped the institutional network within which it's been located. So that work around institutionalization is very important, and the right institutionalization, not of course necessarily that of the DAC. I think it's interesting to talk about non-interference. Of course, you know, I think the world of policy conditionality is disappearing from the West as well. But it seems that language of non-interference isn't going to quite accommodate to what's really happening, which is, again, as Professor Acharya mentioned, growing integration. So it might not be policy conditionality, but you know, in China's latest FOCAC documents, they're talking about merging phytosanitary regimes in order to be able to import and export. So this is not about conditionality or policy or interference anymore, but there are questions about how, as India, China and all the others use South-South in part to globally integrate, what sorts of interference we're talking about here, what sorts of integration and how that's going to fit with questions of sovereignty and so on. So I think it's a more subtle discussion now that's opening up, and not necessarily a particularly easy one, but an important one. And then finally, I just want to mention some work that many of us have been thinking about, and I think Paolo is going to say some more about, which is the I've called, following Sachin, I've sort of credited you with this phrase in a recent paper, Sachin, the southernization of development. I think we're seeing some fascinating trends within the northern DAC partners. For example, a much more explicit, you could argue truthful, articulation of donor self-interest. We now have the British establishment talking about win-win development and mutual benefit. Where did they get that from? Of course, it's partly fictional, but it's a claim. It's an interesting narrative shift. We see a much stronger turn to what we could call neo-mercantilism, the evident and open and articulate supporting of British and Dutch and Australian and Norwegian firms in the promotion of so-called mutual development. Mutual benefit is entirely possible within that development, but it's also entirely easy to conceal the elevation of donor interests under this new language of mutual benefit. So in different ways, I think we're seeing a changing terrain in the north as well. And certainly speaking as, not as a representative, but as a member of a submerging power, I would say that the efforts to engage with the South are quite sincere, because I don't think we still see lots of arrogance, Boris Johnson, idiots like that. But for many, many more in the north, there is a much stronger sense of the way in which the world is headed, and an attempt to reach out to the south. So I think this is all a positive dimension. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for this presentation. I don't intend at all to summarize, but you have made very interesting points. You have mentioned that South-South practices are emulated right now by the North. That's an interesting observation. Also, you've observed a change in the narrative, a narrative shift. I also share your views about the excellent concept note was prepared for this conference, and the reference in particular to dependency theory and previous thinker theory. I think that was quite useful contribution, and it's very important to look not only at the empirical evidence, but as indicated in this note, the theories that may develop in order to capture the essence of South-South cooperation. And also it was quite interesting your reference to the need of global solutions, so South-South cooperation as a possible tool to get global solutions. Thank you very much for these observations and these reflections.